Only little men are never wrong. Another help in overcoming uncertainty is to realize the role that self-esteem and the protection of self-esteem play in indecisiveness. Many people are indecisive because they fear loss of self-esteem if they are proved wrong. Use self-esteem for yourself instead of against yourself by convincing yourself of this truth. Big men and big personalities make mistakes and admit them. It is the little man who is afraid to admit he has been wrong. This, of course, applies equally to women. Success through the process of elimination. I've enjoyed reading Arthur Conan Doyle's tales of the great detective Sherlock Holmes's exploits. Holmes's trusty helpmate, Dr. Watson, a man of many fine qualities but woefully little imagination, is frequently befuddled and amazed as Holmes disappears into his own imagination and emerges with the solution to the most mystifying of crimes. In his imagination, Holmes engages in the pedantic, dogged process of elimination, ultimately arriving at the one best conclusion he cannot eliminate. Then that becomes his target, engaging all of the powers of his automatic success mechanism in uncovering the clues, facts, and evidence that prove it true. That is, he arrives at the target. A lesser detective would, instead, remain mired in the massive difficulty of the task and the confusing, even conflicting testimonies, thus engaging his automatic failure mechanism instead of his automatic success mechanism. It is also worth noting that Holmes is willing to be wrong, and when his first attempts at and proclamations of deduction prove far off course, he does not collapse in embarrassment or humiliation or give control over to frustration and aggression, nor does he retreat into isolation. He virtually shrugs off his mistakes and quickly refocuses, zigging and zagging his way toward his ultimate objective. Thomas Edison's wife once observed that Mr. Edison worked endlessly on a problem, using the method of elimination. If a person asked him whether he were discouraged because so many attempts proved unavailing, he would say, "No, I'm not discouraged, because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward." If outcomes were preordained and certain, no one would play a game, nor would thousands of spectators tune into television to watch it contested. We must learn to embrace the short-term uncertainties of the game, while staying connected to the targets we choose, and trusting that we will achieve our overriding objectives, albeit by zigging and zagging rather than a straight line. Reassure yourself that you are not your mistakes, so that you can freely acknowledge them, extract whatever useful feedback can be found in them, correct course, and continue moving forward. The sixth letter of failure is R. Resentment. When the automatic failure mechanism looks for a scapegoat or excuse for failure, it often serves up society, the system, life, the brakes, luck, the boss, the spouse, even the customer. People in the firm grip of their automatic failure mechanisms resent the success and happiness of others because they are proof that life is shortchanging them and they are being treated unfairly. Resentment is an attempt to make our own failure palatable by explaining it in terms of unfair treatment, injustice. But as a salve for failure, resentment is a cure that is worse than the disease. It is a deadly poison to the spirit, makes happiness impossible, and uses up tremendous energy that could go into accomplishment. Quite often, when people came to me in my practice requesting surgical correction of insignificant imperfections on their faces magnified by their imaginations, conversations with them led to a realization. They disliked what they saw when they looked in the mirror, not due to the reality of the reflection, but the resentment harbored for just about everyone in their life and their life circumstances. Resentment is a way that fails. Resentment is also a way of making us feel important. Many people get a perverse satisfaction from feeling wronged. The victim of injustice, the one who has been unfairly treated, is morally superior to those who cause the injustice. Resentment is also a way, or an attempt, to wipe out or eradicate a real or fancied wrong or injustice that has already happened. The resentful person is trying to prove a case before the court of life, so to speak. If he can feel resentful enough, and thereby prove the injustice, some magic process will reward him by making the event or circumstance that caused the resentment not so. In this sense, resentment is a mental resistance to, a non-acceptance of, something that has already happened. The word itself comes from two Latin words, re, meaning back, and sentire, meaning to feel. Resentment is an emotional rehashing or refighting of some event in the past. You cannot win, because you are attempting to do the impossible. Change the past. Resentment creates an inferior self-image. Resentment, even when based on real injustices and wrongs, is not the way to win. It soon becomes an emotional habit. Habitually feeling that you are a victim of injustice, you begin to picture yourself in the role of a victimized person. You carry around an inner feeling that is looking for an external peg to hang itself on. It is then easy to see evidence of injustice, or fancy you have been wronged, in the most innocent remark or neutral circumstance. Habitual resentment invariably leads to self-pity, which is the worst possible emotional habit anyone can develop. When these habits have become firmly ensconced, a person does not feel right or natural when they are absent. They then literally begin to search for and look for injustices. Someone has said that such people feel good only when they are miserable. Emotional habits of resentment and self-pity also go with an ineffective, inferior self-image. You begin to picture yourself as a pitiful person, a victim, who was meant to be unhappy. The real cause of resentment. Remember that your resentment is not caused by other persons, events, or circumstances. It is caused by your own emotional response, your own reaction. You alone have power over this, and you can control it if you firmly convince yourself that resentment and self-pity are not ways to happiness and success, but ways to defeat and unhappiness. As long as you harbor resentment, it is literally impossible for you to picture yourself as a self-reliant, independent, self-determining person who is the captain of his soul, the master of his fate. The resentful person turns over his reins to other people. They are allowed to dictate how he shall feel, how he shall act. He is wholly dependent on other people, just as a beggar is. He makes unreasonable demands and claims on other people. If everyone else should be dedicated to making you happy, you will be resentful when it doesn't work out that way. If you feel that other people owe you eternal gratitude, undying appreciation, or continual recognition of your superlative worth, you will feel resentment when these debts are not paid. If life owes you a living, you become resentful when it isn't forthcoming. Resentment is therefore inconsistent with creative goal striving. In creative goal striving, you are the creator, not the passive recipient. You set your goals. No one owes you anything. You go out after your own goals. You become responsible for your own success and happiness. Resentment doesn't fit into this picture, and because it doesn't, it is a failure mechanism. In a sense, there is no justice, but we may manufacture just results for ourselves. It is fact that by the very act of birth, one person is unjustly set out to begin a hard life in a ghetto filled with street crime, while another, born in a crosstown hospital that same moment, will begin life in a safe suburb. One will go to a school in disrepair, the other to a school with every modern advantage. Similarly, it is a fact that, in many sales offices, leads are disproportionately or unjustly distributed by the sales manager to her pets and those in her doghouse. It is a fact that promotion in corporate settings frequently occurs due to factors other than pure merit. We could go on and on. There's no denying injustice. If you intend to insist on justice in order to live a successful and happy life, you will not do so in this lifetime on this planet. The other day, just after emerging from my New York townhouse wearing a brand new, beautifully tailored suit out of the wrapper for the very first time, en route to an important luncheon engagement, a passing taxicab roared through a muddy puddle and splashed dirty water all over my pants. It occurred to me a more just arrangement would be if taxicabs only splashed puddle water onto people wearing old work clothes already soiled, only if on their way home, so that changing out of them would pose no inconvenience. Maybe I should lobby the mayor to pass such a law. Of course, I was helpless to undo this unjust incident, or to do anything to eradicate this injustice in general from being part and parcel of living in the city. I could certainly be more careful in the future, but that was neither here nor there. The immediate choice before me was to spend the rest of my day frustrated, angry, bitter, and resentful, or to recalibrate and take whatever constructive actions possible to get back on track toward an enjoyable and productive meeting. I admit it is easier to react this way to such a minor injustice as taxicabs, puddles, and soiled trousers than to racial injustice in society or bureaucratic injustice in your career. But the outcome will be the same. The fundamental choices are the same. And you can enjoy the powers of your automatic success mechanism only if you choose to rise above injustice, small or large. Over the years, psychocybernetics has found its way into quite a number of prison inmate counseling programs, classes, halfway house classes, and the like. I suppose thousands of copies of my books have been donated to prisons and to individual prisoners. Even today, the Psychocybernetics Foundation does not deny sincere requests from inmates for the book. As a result, I've had many conversations with wardens, counselors, pastors, and others working in this environment, and naturally the subject of recidivism comes up often. A great cost to individuals, families, and society is the majority of prisoners who, once released after serving time, fail to stay straight and wind up back in prison again and again. I've become convinced that recidivism is nothing more than resentment realized. If a person emerges from prison into society with his resentments intact, resentment against his upbringing and background, his prosecutors and jailers, his current lack of resources, the difficulty he faces in gaining others' acceptance and trust, etc., he is nearly certain to commit new crimes and return himself to prison. Only the rare individual who manages to cleanse herself of these resentments and recalibrate is able to stay straight. Similarly, any individual who permits resentment to control her thoughts locks herself and her potential into a prison of her own making. She is her own hanging judge, discompassionate jury, and jailer. And the last letter of failure is E, emptiness. Perhaps as you listened to this chapter you thought of someone who had been successful in spite of frustration, misdirected aggressiveness, resentment, etc. But do not be too sure. Many people acquire the outward symbols of success, but when they go to open the long sought-for treasure chest, they find it empty. It is as if the money they have strained so hard to attain turns to counterfeit in their hands. Along the way, they lost the capacity to enjoy. And when you have lost the capacity to enjoy, no amount of wealth or anything else can bring success or happiness. These people win the nut of success, but when they crack it open, it is empty. Those who have the capacity to enjoy, still alive within them, find enjoyment in many ordinary and simple things in life. They also enjoy whatever success in a material way they have achieved. Those in whom the capacity to enjoy is dead can find enjoyment in nothing, be it a $1 ice cream cone or a $1 million mansion. No goal is worth working for. Life is a terrible bore. Nothing is worthwhile. You can see these people by the hundreds, night after night, knocking themselves out in nightclubs, trying to convince themselves they are enjoying it. They travel from place to place, become entangled in a whirl of parties, hoping to find enjoyment, always finding an empty shell. The truth is that joy is an accompaniment of creative function, of creative goal striving. It is possible to win a fake success, but when you do, you are penalized with an empty joy. Life becomes worthwhile when you have worthwhile goals. This is the psychocybernetic secret to keeping your automatic failure mechanism safely asleep, not troubled by any assignment from you, and not troubling you with the results of its labors. Life is worthwhile only when you have firmly fixed in your sights worthwhile goals. Emptiness is a symptom that you are not living creatively. You either have no goal that is important enough to you, or you are not using your talents and efforts in striving toward an important goal. The person who has no purpose of her own pessimistically concludes life has no purpose. The person who has no goal worth working for concludes life is not worthwhile. The person with no important job to do complains there is nothing to do. The individual who is actively engaged in striving toward an important goal or goals does not come up with pessimistic philosophies concerning the meaninglessness or the futility of life in general or his life in specific. Even the most elderly can and do operate as goal-striving, optimistic people. A wonderful trend has been the migration of retirees to small college towns, where they pursue goals of learning, education, mastery of interesting subjects, acquire some skill they never found time to previously pursue, mentor others. Earlier in this program, I described the 4 steps of the learning process. Aliveness is based on constantly setting new goals and then moving up that four-step ladder of learning in order to effectively pursue them. Emptiness is not a way that wins. Emptiness, once experienced, can become a way of avoiding effort, work, and responsibility. It becomes an excuse or a justification for non-creative living. If all is vanity, if there is no new thing under the sun, if there is no joy to be found anyway, why bother? Why try? If life is just a treadmill, if we work 8 hours a day so that we can afford a house to sleep in, so that we can sleep 8 hours to become rested for another day's work, why get excited about it? All these intellectual reasons vanish, however, and we experience joy and satisfaction once we get off the treadmill, stop going around and around in circles, and select a goal worth striving for, and go after it. Emptiness and an inadequate self-image go together. Emptiness may also be the symptom of an inadequate self-image. It is impossible to psychologically accept something that you feel does not belong to you, or that is not consistent with yourself. Those who hold an unworthy and undeserving self-image may hold their negative tendencies in check long enough to achieve a genuine success, then be unable to accept it psychologically and enjoy it. They may even feel guilty about it, as if they had stolen it. Their negative self-image may even spur them on to achievement by the well-known principle of overcompensation. But I do not subscribe to the theory that one should be proud of an inferiority complex, or thankful for it just because it sometimes leads to the external symbols of success. When success finally comes, such persons feel little sense of satisfaction or accomplishment. They are unable to take credit in their own minds for their accomplishments. To the world, they are a success. They themselves still feel inferior, undeserving, almost as if they were thieves and had stolen the status symbols that they thought were so important. If my friends and associates really knew what a phony I am, they think. This reaction is so common that psychiatrists refer to it as the success rejection syndrome. The man who feels guilty, insecure, and anxious when he realizes he has succeeded. Only striving for goals that are important to you, not as status symbols, but because they are consistent with your own deep inner wants, is healthful. Striving for real success, for your success through creative accomplishment, brings a deep inner satisfaction. Striving for a phony success to please others brings a phony satisfaction. Try this mental training exercise. Awareness, acknowledgement, and prompt reaction to a slumbering automatic failure mechanism awakening and attempting to distract you with failure is important. Glance at negatives, but focus on positives. Automobiles come equipped with negative indicators placed directly in front of the driver to tell you when the battery is not charging, when the engine is becoming too hot, when the oil pressure is becoming too low, etc. To ignore these negatives might ruin your car. However, there is no need to become unduly upset if a negative signal flashes. You merely stop at a service station or a garage and take positive action to correct the problem. A negative signal does not mean the car is no good. All cars overheat at times. However, the driver of the automobile does not look at the control panel exclusively and continuously. To do so might be disastrous. She must focus her gaze through the windshield, look where she is going, and keep her primary attention on her goal, where she wants to go. She merely glances at the negative indicators from time to time. When she does not fix on them or dwell on them. She quickly focuses her sight ahead again and concentrates on the positive goal of where she wants to go. How to use negative thinking. We should adopt a similar attitude about our own negative symptoms. I am a firm believer in negative thinking when used correctly. We need to be aware of negatives so that we can steer clear of them. A golfer needs to know where the bunkers and sand traps are, but he doesn't think continuously about the bunker where he doesn't want to go. His mind glances at the bunker, but dwells on the green. Used correctly, this type of negative thinking can work for us to lead us to success if 1. We are sensitive to the negative to the extent that it can alert us to danger. 2. We recognize the negative for what it is, something undesirable, something we don't want, something that does not bring genuine happiness. 3. We take immediate corrective action and substitute an opposite positive factor from the success mechanism. Such practice will in time create a sort of automatic reflex that becomes a part of our inner guidance system. Negative feedback will act as a sort of automatic control to help us steer clear of failure and guide us to success. Take a few minutes toward the conclusion of each day or midday, and at day's end if you can. Find a quiet place, close your eyes, enter your imagination so as to revisit the day's events and your behavior. Congratulate yourself on all your automatic success mechanism reflective actions, but take note of automatic failure mechanism warning lights quietly flashing on the dashboard. Tell yourself that automatic failure mechanism behavior is not you and is not to be tolerated. If corrections can be made for any that occurred, by all means make them. Be the bigger person by calling or going to see anyone who may deserve your apology, your gratitude, or your congratulations. Analyze your thoughts and actions of the day in terms of contributing toward achieving your goals. Even measure your ratio of automatic success mechanism versus automatic failure mechanism driven activity. Then resolve to improve that ratio. Do not fear self-analysis. Stick with self-coaching. Avoid self-loathing. Conclude your private critique of the day by identifying positives you can build on and the recommitment to your goals and ideals. Chapter 10. How to remove emotional scars and give yourself an emotional facelift. Erica Zhang wrote, "Anger is really disappointed hope." The facelift business is booming. Cosmetic surgery profession revenues have increased by double-digit percentages each year for the past handful of years. You now see mass television advertising offering any combination of procedures desired: nose, ears, throat, whole facelift, breast enlargement, buttocks improvement, tummy tuck, for a set monthly payment akin to buying a car on payments. Still, many people seeking emotional salvation and satisfaction from the surgical scalpel will wake up with a new face or better sculpted body, but with old disappointment and frustration. I and others have learned a great deal about psychocybernetics in the more than 50 years that have passed since I first began drawing the connection between patients coming to my office seeking to correct scars in their outer image and the existence of scars hidden away on their inner image, or self-image. However, the fundamental analogy is every bit as valid as when first uncovered and recognized. As a medical doctor and surgeon, I have performed countless operations of reconstructive as well as cosmetic facial surgery, and been privileged to lecture on such clinical techniques all over the world. Yet I have never become jaded about the miraculous systems built into the human body. For example, when you receive a physical injury, such as a cut on the face, your body automatically forms scar tissue, which is both tougher and thicker than the original flesh. The purpose of the scar tissue is to form a protective cover or shell, nature's way of ensuring against another injury in the same place. If an ill-fitting shoe rubs against a sensitive part of your foot, the first result is pain and sensitiveness. But again, nature protects against further pain and injury by forming a callus, a protective shell. We are inclined to do very much the same thing whenever we receive an emotional injury, when someone hurts us or rubs us the wrong way. We form emotional or spiritual scars for self-protection. We are very apt to become hardened of heart, callous toward the world, and to withdraw within a protective emotional shell of one kind or another. What we can learn when nature needs an assist. In forming scar tissue, it is nature's intention to be helpful. In our modern society, however, scar tissue, especially on the face, can work against us instead of for us. Take George T., for example, a promising young attorney. He was affable, personable, and well on his way to a successful career when he had an automobile accident, which left him with a horrible scar from midway on his left cheek to the left corner of his mouth. Another cut, just over his right eye, pulled his upper eyelid up tightly when it healed, which gave him a grotesque, glaring appearance. Every time he looked in the bathroom mirror, he saw a repulsive image. The scar on his cheek gave him a perpetual leer, or what he called an evil look. After leaving the hospital, he lost his first case in court, and was sure that his evil and grotesque appearance had influenced the jury. He felt that old friends were repelled and repulsed by his appearance. Was it only his imagination that even his own wife flinched slightly when he kissed her? George T. began to turn down cases. He started drinking during the day. He became irritable, hostile, and something of a recluse. The scar tissue on his face formed a tough protection against future automobile accidents. But in the society in which George lived, physical injuries to his face were not the primary hazard. He was more vulnerable than ever to social cuts, injuries, and hurts. His scars were a liability instead of an asset. Had George been a primitive man and suffered facial scars from an encounter with a bear or a saber-toothed tiger, his scars would have probably made him more acceptable to his fellows. Even in fairly recent times, old soldiers have proudly displayed their scars of battle. I suspect the same is true of young toughs in inner-city gangs. In George's case, nature had good intentions, but nature needed an assist. I gave George back his old face by plastic surgery, which removed the scar tissue and restored his features. Following the surgery, the personality change in him was remarkable. He became his good-natured, self-confident self again. He stopped drinking. He gave up his lone wolf attitude, moved back into society, and became a member of the human race again. He literally found a new life. This new life, however, was brought about only indirectly by plastic surgery on physical tissue. The real curative agent was the removal of emotional scars, the security against social cuts, the healing of emotional hurts and injuries, and the restoration of his self-image as an acceptable member of society, which in his case, surgery made possible. Most people build up a considerable amount of scar tissue on their self-images with no correlation whatsoever to actual physical disfigurement that can be solved by a skilled surgeon with a scalpel. How emotional scars alienate you from life. Many people have inner emotional scars who have never suffered physical injuries, and the resultant personality is the same. These people have been hurt or injured by someone in the past. To guard against future injury from that source, they form a spiritual callus, an emotional scar to protect their ego. This scar tissue, however, protects them not only against the individual who originally hurt them, but also all other human beings. An emotional wall is built through which neither friend nor foe can pass. Zig Ziglar tells an amusing story about a cat who innocently traipses across a stovetop and lands on a burner still hot from recent use. With a loud yelp, the cat leaps off the stove and sulks away to nurse its tender paws. Zig says, "Not only won't that cat ever climb up on that stove again, he'll never even go into the kitchen." Emotional scar tissue built up on the self-image affects people like scorched paws affect that cat. Given several repeats of an unpleasant, embarrassing, or frustrating scarring experience, the affected individual not only avoids the precise situation, he avoids the general area in which it might occur. For example, I once counseled a very capable executive rising up the ranks in a big corporation who had been repeatedly chastened by his mentor and boss for sitting as quiet as a church mouse through meeting after meeting, only a spectator, not a participant. This fellow had very good ideas and input to offer, often did so privately, and often missed any credit for his contributions. In fact, most of his colleagues viewed him as dead wood, and wondered about the boss's motives for having this fellow on the payroll. You can probably do your own diagnosis at this point and guess right. This fellow had, throughout his junior and senior high school years, stuttered nervously if called on in class, suffered ridicule from other students, and, as a result, withdrawn from active participation in his classes, doing his level best to be invisible at all times. Call that the first layer of self-image scar tissue. Fast forward to his first marriage. Both his ex-wife and ex-mother-in-law were domineering personalities, quite possibly abusive, both constantly criticizing this fellow's ideas, whether choice of clothes, political opinion, even an opinion about a book or TV program. Early in this marriage, he adopted a keep-it-to-himself attitude. This became a second layer of scar tissue. Fast forward to a very recent year when, active in his community association, he found himself at odds over an issue with a very influential, egotistical, uncompromising, bullying, and far more persuasive neighbor. His adversary attacked any idea this fellow proposed thoroughly and aggressively, and turned enough others against this fellow that he was summarily voted off the council at the end of his first year's term. Layer number 3. It didn't matter now that he was not dealing with school children, an abusive mother-in-law, or neighbors, that he was in a very different environment, that he had the full support of a powerful mentor and boss, that his suggestions would be listened to with respect, and that it was far more important for him to assert himself than at any of these other times. It didn't matter that this situation was very different from the others. Like the entire kitchen is to one stovetop burner, this situation was still in the general area of the others, close enough to be threatening to his self-image. Consequently, instead of representing the self-image of the smart, competent, promising executive he was, in these circumstances, he represented the self-image of a scaredy cat. Putty, not plaster. Could this man scrape away all this scar tissue and liberate his self-image? Absolutely. Using all the tools of psychocybernetics we have discussed: awareness, rational thought, deliberate decision, that is, establishing the target, purposeful use of the imagination, including the theater of the mind mental rehearsal techniques. In his fine book, Profiles of Success and Power, Dr. Gene Lundgren writes, "Self-image is not set in plaster, it is set in putty." Unquote. I'm known as a plastic surgeon, but as an amateur sculptor for many years, I enjoy taking scalpel to clay and have often sculpted, unsculpted, and resculpted a face in clay until it was exactly as I imagined. The clay or putty-like material stays soft and malleable enough to do so many, many times. In His infinite wisdom, God manufactured the self-image of similar material, so it remains malleable throughout our entire lives. No one is ever too old, too jaded, too frightened, or too traumatized to wet the clay and begin remaking it as they imagine and desire. Do not overprotect yourself. As in the case of a facial scar, excessive protection against the original source of injury can make us more vulnerable and do us even more damage in other areas. The emotional wall that we build as protection against one person or one situation cuts us off from all other human beings, from many opportunities, even from our real selves. As we have pointed out previously, the person who feels lonely or out of touch with other human beings also feels out of touch with his real self and with life. These listed techniques of psychocybernetics, all combined, place in your hands a most powerful, magical emotional scalpel, and they infuse your hands with the dynamic talent and ability of a world-class emotional surgeon, so that you may remove whatever emotional scars now inhibit your self-image. But to do so, you must take a risk. You must risk bumps in the road, disappointment, rejection, and mistakes, with the certainty that they will occur, but will not deter you from your overriding goals. Don't underestimate the power of emotional scars. Built-up emotional scars, one atop the other, make the self-image a threatened and vulnerable entity that triggers survival mode behavior from the servo mechanism: flee or fight, fear or pugnacious aggressiveness, whenever confronted with a situation it senses might harm it, in the same way as the past incidents that left scars. In a book titled Anxiety Disorders and Phobias, the authors, including a cognitive therapist, state that the same apparatus that prevents a person from venturing into physical danger also deters him from exposing himself to psychological danger. Unquote. In other words, the servo mechanism may not be able to accurately assess the relativity of dangers. For example, you are not in any physical danger due to social embarrassment at a dinner party by not being able to hold up your end of the conversation. Perhaps because you make less money than the other guests and feel inferior because of it, and are therefore fearful of being asked about your job or investments. Yet the situation may trigger the same kind of anxiety and inhibition as being confronted by a mugger in a dark alley. In the case of the mugger, meekly taking out your wallet and throwing it toward or past the mugger and running as fast as you can in the opposing direction may be appropriate. In the social situation, throwing away all opportunity for a pleasant evening and fleeing into silence or monosyllabic responses is wholly inappropriate and may lead to the exact result you are worried about, being perceived badly by hosts and other guests alike. The social situation is most likely to trigger this survival reaction if it closely resembles some situations that have left scar tissue on the self-image. I would like to make one point addressed earlier in the program. You do not necessarily have to painstakingly revisit every incident or influence all the way to early childhood in order to perform the emotional surgery needed to liberate a scarred self-image from this compulsive triggering of survivalist behavior in situations where it is inappropriate and counterproductive. You can begin with fresh programming, using recall of successes, mental movies, mental rehearsal, and other psychocybernetics techniques. Acceptance of the new by the self-image will automatically remove the old scars. Remember the term solution-oriented therapy, or better yet, do-it-yourself solution-oriented therapy, and think in those terms, rather than the cliché of 30 years of weekly visits to the couch. Emotional scars help make juvenile delinquents. Psychiatrist Bernard Holland has pointed out that although juvenile delinquents appear to be very independent and have the reputation of being braggarts, particularly about how they hate everyone in authority, they protest too much. Underneath this hard exterior shell, says Dr. Holland, is a soft, vulnerable inner person who wants to be dependent upon others. Unquote. However, they cannot get close to anyone because they will not trust anyone. Sometime in the past they were hurt by a person important to them, and they dare not leave themselves open to be hurt again. They always have their defenses up. To prevent further rejection and pain, they attack first. Thus, they drive away the very people who would love them if given half a chance, and could help them. A popular staple of daytime television talk shows these days is the theme show featuring teens out of control. Teens swearing, abusing their parents, skipping school, drinking, using drugs, engaging in promiscuous sex, even shoplifting and stealing cars. The show host and the parents turn these out-of-control teens over to military-type juvenile boot camp leaders who drag them off stage and take them away to boot camp. Weeks later they return, many dramatically changed. This is all controversial, yet there is considerable evidence of it getting positive and lasting results more often than not. When it works, why does it work? Even at a young age, these youngsters have piled on layer on layer on layer on layer of scar tissue, so that their self-image has totally handed over the reins to negative, automatic failure mechanism emotions, notably including aggression to the nth degree. You've no doubt heard the saying, desperate circumstances require desperate measures. These boot camp interventions are desperate, last resort measures, in a sense, incredibly sharp emotional scalpels. To slice away all the protective hardened scar tissue on these self-images requires these heavy-handed, confrontive techniques. Bottom line, most delinquency is symptomatic of severe emotional scarring, a profoundly unhealthy self-image, an automatic failure mechanism unleashed and unchecked. Carefully consider all your own habitual or repetitive behaviors and life experiences. Do you suffer through one disappointing intimate relationship after another? Do you find one group of co-workers after another disagreeable? Are all your clients cheapskates or difficult, and so on? Whether avoidance or aggression, self-image scarring is involved. Can we prevent future emotional scarring? There is a cowboy saying that is a favorite of this book's editor. The first step to getting out of a hole is to stop digging. We might say that the first step to liberating a scarred self-image is to stop piling on more scar tissue. Can we do so? Certainly. New knowledge about why you respond to certain stimuli as you do, heightened emphasis on rational thinking, and maturity can be your allies. Just as there are smart things you can do that are within your sphere of control to strengthen your physical immune system, such as eating certain foods and avoiding others, taking antioxidant vitamin supplements, regularly exercising, there are things you can do to strengthen your emotional immune system as well. 3 prescriptions for immunizing yourself against emotional hurts. Prescription 1. Be too big to feel threatened. Many people become hurt terribly by tiny pinpricks, or what we call social slights. Everyone knows someone in the family, office, or circle of friends who is so thin-skinned and sensitive that others must be continually on guard lest offense be taken at some innocent word or act. It is a well-known psychological fact that the people who become offended the easiest have the lowest self-esteem. We are hurt by things we conceive of as threats to our ego or self-esteem. Fancied emotional thrusts that go unnoticed by the person with wholesome self-esteem slice these people up terribly. Even real digs and cuts, which inflict a terrible injury to the ego of the person with low self-esteem, do not make a dent in the ego of those who think well of themselves. The person who feels undeserving, who doubts his own capabilities, and who has a poor opinion of himself becomes jealous at the drop of a hat. The person who secretly doubts her own worth and who feels insecure within herself, who sees threats to her ego where there are none, exaggerates and overestimates the potential damage from real threats. We all need a certain amount of emotional toughness and ego security to protect us from real and fancied ego threats. It wouldn't be wise for our physical body to be covered over completely with a hard callus or a shell like a turtle's. We would be denied the pleasure of all sensual feeling. But our body does have a layer of outer skin, the epidermis, for the purpose of protecting us from invasion of bacteria, small bumps and bruises, and small pinpricks. The epidermis is thick enough and tough enough to offer protection against small wounds, but not so thick or hard that it interferes with all feeling. Many people have no epidermis on their ego. They have only the thin, sensitive inner skin. They need to become thicker-skinned, emotionally tougher, so that they will simply ignore petty cuts and minor ego threats. Also, they need to build up their self-esteem, get a better and more adequate self-image of themselves, so that they will not feel threatened by every chance remark or innocent act. A big, strong person does not feel threatened by a small danger. A weak, little person does. In the same way, a healthy, strong self-image does not feel itself threatened by every innocent or offhand remark. It seems that some people literally go through life waiting to be offended. They are rarely disappointed. Prescription 2. Healthy self-images do not bruise easily. The person who feels his self-worth is threatened by a slighting remark has a small, weak ego and a small amount of self-esteem. He is self-centered, self-concerned, hard to get along with, and what we call egotistic. But we do not cure a sick or weak ego by beating it down, undermining it, or making it even weaker through self-abnegation or trying to become selfless. Self-esteem is as necessary to the spirit as food is to the body. The cure for self-centeredness, self-concern, egotism, and all the ills that go with it is the development of a healthy, strong ego by building up self-esteem. When a person has adequate self-esteem, little slights offer no threat at all. They are simply passed over and ignored. Even deeper emotional wounds are likely to heal faster and cleaner, with no festering sores to poison life and spoil happiness. Prescription 3. Don't take things so personally. I remember when Polish jokes were the rage, and having a real estate agent tell me that her office colleagues all disliked her for some reason and made fun of her at every opportunity. When I asked her for the evidence, she cited their telling of Polish jokes. This woman was married, however, and did not use her maiden name, which clearly revealed her Polish heritage. I had not known she was Polish until she told me. One of the businessmen I occasionally went to the driving range with delighted in telling me doctor jokes. I found them amusing, and never did it occur to me that he was secretly trying to wound me personally. The two situations weren't that different, but the two self-images involved certainly were. When you habitually personalize every slight, every overheard conversation, even things you read or hear in media, you reveal a very thin-skinned self-image with the weakest of immunities. Be bigger than such things. Have bigger fish to fry, as the saying goes. The person in hot pursuit of meaningful, rewarding goals and a calendar of important things to do has little time to obsess over trivial slights and offenses. Most dumb, insensitive remarks are dumb, insensitive remarks. They have no hidden meaning, and searching for it, certainly being offended by it, is an utter waste of time. The popular writer of pulp westerns, Louis L'Amour, was once asked in an interview to reveal the hidden meaning behind the fact that none of the villains in any of his hundreds of books ever died from the first bullet. The interviewer thought he was on to something. The novelist answered, "Because in those days, we got paid by the word. I am not getting paid by the word, so I'll move on." Try this mental training exercise. Visit the supermarket. Find and buy 2 potatoes, the smallest, most stunted one, and the biggest one. Set them side by side on your desk or somewhere frequently visible to you during the day. You might even take a Polaroid photograph of the 2 of them side by side and post it on your automobile visor or dashboard, inside your briefcase, someplace you will see it. Let it trigger the thought that your self-image is bigger than a tiny, stunted potato, and ask yourself if you are acting as a big potato or a shrunken spud today. A self-reliant, responsible attitude makes you less vulnerable. As Dr. Holland has pointed out, the juvenile delinquent with the hard outer shell has a soft, vulnerable inner person who wants to be dependent on others and wants to be loved by others. Sales professionals tell me that those who put up the most sales resistance at the outset are frequently easy sells once you get past their defenses. That people who feel called on to put up "No salesman allowed" signs do so because they know they are soft touches and need protection. The person with the hard, gruff exterior usually develops it because instinctively he realizes that he is so soft inside that he needs protection. The person who has little or no self-reliance, who feels emotionally dependent on others, makes herself most vulnerable to emotional hurts. Every human being wants and needs love and affection, but the creative, self-reliant person also feels a need to give love. Her emphasis is as much or more on the giving as on the getting. She doesn't expect love to be handed to her on a silver platter, nor does she have a compulsive need that everybody must love her and approve of her. The passive dependent person turns her entire destiny over to other people, circumstances, luck. Life owes her a living, and other people owe her consideration, appreciation, love, happiness. She makes unreasonable demands and claims on other people and feels cheated, wronged, hurt when they aren't fulfilled. Because life just isn't built that way, she is seeking the impossible and leaving herself wide open to emotional hurts and injuries. Once, while speaking to a large convention of salespeople, I met another professional speaker I had heard quite a bit about. He was very successful and in considerable demand in the sales world, but he told me that he rarely got fan mail and almost never got rounds of hearty applause when he concluded his presentations, and he seemed oddly proud of the fact. When I asked him about this, he explained, "It's because I make 'em mad." He went on to quote the Harry Truman "Give 'em hell" quote. Truman reportedly said, "I don't give 'em hell. I tell them the truth and they think it's hell," or something like that. Anyway, this fellow was one of the busiest, highest paid, least beloved speakers in the business, and proud of it. His corporate clients who paid his fees loved having him lay into the troops. Often, his pot stirring of indignation converted into heightened sales performance immediately, as many of the salespeople determined to show that SOB something. This is somewhat the equivalent of the football coach posting a newspaper clipping in the locker room, quoting players from the next opposing team, dissing them. I'll freely admit, it's not a role as a speaker I would seek out or enjoy, but it is interesting how self-reliant and immune his self-image is to the lack of love in the room. It is up to you to develop a more self-reliant attitude. Assume responsibility for your own life and emotional needs. We have a saying, "Give yourself your own gold stars." As emotionally immature children, we look to parents and teachers for gold stars. Draw or color a picture, immediately race to take it to Mom, who oohs and ahs over it and proudly displays it on the refrigerator door with magnets. As an adult, you must graduate from such urgent neediness. You must be able to admire your own good work and recognize your own achievements. This loops back to the discussion about your AQ in Chapter 8. The refusal to blame ourselves or others, or to accept a problem as beyond our influence, gives us resiliency in the face of adversity. Relax away emotional hurts. I once had a patient ask me, if the forming of scar tissue is a natural and automatic thing, why doesn't scar tissue form when a plastic surgeon makes an incision? The answer is that if you cut your face and it heals naturally, scar tissue will form, because a certain amount of tension in the wound and just underneath the wound pulls the surface of the skin back, creates a gap, which is filled in by scar tissue. A plastic surgeon who operates not only pulls the skin together closely by suturing, but also cuts out a small amount of flesh underneath the skin so that there is no tension present. The incision heals smoothly, evenly, and with no distorting surface scar. It is interesting to note that the same thing happens in the case of an emotional wound. If there is no tension present, there is no disfiguring emotional scar left. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to get your feelings hurt or take offense when you are suffering tensions brought about by frustration, fear, anger, or depression? We go to work feeling out of sorts or down in the dumps or with self-confidence shaken because of some adverse experience. A friend comes by and makes a joking remark. 9 times out of 10 we would laugh, think it funny, think nothing about it. and make a good-natured crack in return. But not today. Today we are suffering tensions of self-doubt, insecurity, anxiety. We take the remark in the wrong way, become offended and hurt, and an emotional scar begins to form. This simple everyday experience illustrates very well the principle that we are injured and hurt emotionally not so much by other people or what they say or don't say, but by our own attitude and our own response. Relaxation cushions emotional blows. When we feel hurt or offended, the feeling is entirely a matter of our own response. In fact, the feeling is our response. It is our own responses that we have to be concerned about, not other people's. We can tighten up, become angry, anxious, or resentful, and feel hurt. Or we can make no response, remain relaxed, and feel no hurt. Scientific experiments have shown that it is absolutely impossible to feel fear, anger, anxiety, or negative emotions of any kind while the muscles of the body are kept perfectly relaxed. We have to do something to feel fear, anger, anxiety. No man is hurt but by himself, said Diogenes. Nothing can work me damage except myself, said St. Bernard. The harm that I sustain I carry about with me, and am never a real sufferer but by my own fault. You alone are responsible for your responses and reactions. You do not have to respond at all. You can remain relaxed and free from injury. Here's a prescription to help you along. Take time each and every day to apply these 3 principles. 1. Take time to relax and de-stress. 2. Make notes, even written notes, of your accomplishments and progress toward your goals. A written success diary is a very simple tool for building a stronger self-image. 3. Create a visualization, a mental picture or two to call up and assist you when confronted by unjust criticism, catty remarks, or other attacks on your self-image. One patient of mine told me he would call up a cartoon-like image of his head on Superman's body, standing in the classic Superman pose, chest stuck out, bullets bouncing off, cape flying in the wind. How to remove old emotional scars. We can prevent and immunize ourselves against emotional scars by practicing the 3 foregoing rules. But what about the old emotional scars formed in the past, the old hurts, grudges, grievances against life, resentments? Once an emotional scar has formed, there is but one thing to do, and that is to remove it by surgery, the same as a physical scar. Give yourself a spiritual facelift. In removing old emotional scars, you alone can do the operation. You must become your own plastic surgeon and give yourself a spiritual facelift. The results will be new life and new vitality, a newfound peace of mind and happiness. To speak of an emotional facelift and the use of mental surgery is more than a simile. Old emotional scars cannot be doctored or medicated. They must be cut out, given up entirely, eradicated. Many people apply various kinds of salve or balm to old emotional wounds, but this simply does not work. They may self-righteously forego overt and physical revenge, yet take it out or get even in many subtle ways. A typical example is the wife who discovers her husband's infidelity. Upon the advice of her minister and/or psychiatrist, she agrees she should forgive him. Accordingly, she does not shoot him. She does not leave him. In all overt behavior, she is a dutiful wife. She keeps the house neatly. She prepares meals well, and so on. But she makes his life hell on earth in many subtle ways by the coldness of her heart and by flaunting her moral superiority. When he complains, her answer is, "Well, dear, I did forgive you, but I cannot forget." Her very forgiveness becomes a thorn in his side, because she is conscious of the fact that it is proof of her moral superiority. She would have been more kind to him and been happier herself had she refused this type of forgiveness and left him. Forgiveness is a scalpel that removes emotional scars. "I can forgive, but I cannot forget," is only another way of saying, "I will not forgive," said Henry Ward Beecher. Forgiveness ought to be like a canceled note, torn in two and burned up, so that it never can be shown against one." Unquote. Forgiveness, when it is real and genuine and complete and forgotten, is the scalpel which can remove the pus from old emotional wounds, heal them, and eliminate scar tissue. Forgiveness which is partial or half-hearted works no better than a partially completed surgical operation on the face. Pretended forgiveness, which is entered into as a duty, is no more effective than a simulated facial surgery. Your forgiveness should be forgotten, as well as the wrong which was forgiven. Forgiveness which is remembered and dwelt upon reinfects the wound you are attempting to cauterize. If you're too proud of your forgiveness, or remember it too much, you are very apt to feel that the other person owes you something for forgiving him. You forgive him one debt, but in doing so he incurs another, much like the operators of small loan companies who cancel one note and make out a new one every 2 weeks. Forgiveness is not a weapon. There are many common fallacies regarding forgiveness, and one of the reasons that its therapeutic value has not been more recognized is the fact that real forgiveness has been so seldom tried. For example, many writers have told us that we should forgive to make us good. We have seldom been advised to forgive that we might be happy. Another fallacy is that forgiveness places us in a superior position, or is a method of winning out over our enemy. This thought has appeared in many glib phrases such as, "Don't merely try to get even," "Forgive your enemy, and you get ahead of him." Tillotson, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, tells us, "A more glorious victory cannot be gained over another man than this, that when the injury began on his part, the kindness should begin on ours." Unquote. This is just another way of saying that forgiveness itself can be used as an effective weapon of revenge, which it can. Revengeful forgiveness, however, is not therapeutic forgiveness. Therapeutic forgiveness cuts out, eradicates, cancels, makes the wrong as if it had never been. Therapeutic forgiveness is like surgery. Give up grudges as you would a gangrenous arm. First, the wrong, and particularly our own feeling of condemnation of it, must be seen as an undesirable thing rather than a desirable thing. Before anyone can agree to have an arm amputated, he must cease to see the arm as a desirable thing to be retained, but as an undesirable, damaging, and threatening thing to be given up. In facial surgery, there can be no partial, tentative, or halfway measures. The scar tissue is cut out completely and entirely. The wound is allowed to heal cleanly, and care is taken to see that the face will be restored in every particular just as it was before injury, and just as if the injury had never been. You can forgive, if you're willing. Therapeutic forgiveness is not difficult. The only difficulty is to secure your own willingness to give up and do without your sense of condemnation, your willingness to cancel out the debt with no mental reservations. We find it difficult to forgive only because we like our sense of condemnation. We get a perverse and morbid enjoyment out of nursing our wounds. As long as we can condemn others, we can feel superior to them. No one can deny that there is also a perverse sense of satisfaction in feeling sorry for yourself. Your reasons for forgiveness are important. In therapeutic forgiveness, we cancel out the debt of the other person not because we have decided to be generous, do a favor, or we are a morally superior person. We cancel the debt, mark it null and void, not because we have made the other person pay sufficiently for the wrong, but because we have come to recognize that the debt itself is not valid. True forgiveness comes only when we are able to see and emotionally accept that there is and was nothing for us to forgive. We should not have condemned or hated the other person in the first place. Not long ago I went to a luncheon also attended by a number of clergy. The subject of forgiveness came up in general, and then the case of the adulterous woman, whom Jesus forgave in particular. I listened to a very learned discussion of why Jesus was able to forgive the woman, how he forgave her, how his forgiveness was a rebuke to the churchmen of his time, who were ready to stone her, etc., etc. Jesus didn't forgive the adulterous woman. I resisted the temptation to shock these gentlemen by pointing out that actually Jesus never forgave the woman at all. Nowhere in the narrative, as it appears in the New Testament, is the word forgive or forgiveness used, or even hinted at, nor can it be reasonably implied from the facts as given in the story. We are told merely that after her accusers had left, Jesus asked the woman, "Hath no man condemned thee?" When she answered in the negative, he said, "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." You cannot forgive others unless you have first condemned them. Jesus never condemned the woman in the first place, so there was nothing for him to forgive. He recognized her sin or her mistake, but did not feel called on to hate her for it. He was able to see, before the fact, what you and I must see after the fact in practicing therapeutic forgiveness. That we ourselves err when we hate others because of their mistakes, when we condemn them, or when we classify them as certain types, confusing the person with the behavior, or when we mentally incur a debt that others must pay before being restored to our good graces and our emotional acceptance. Whether you ought to do this, whether you should do it, or whether you can reasonably be expected to do it is a matter outside the scope of this program and my own field. I can only tell you as a doctor that if you will do it, you will be far happier and healthier, and you will attain more peace of mind. However, I would like to point out that this is what therapeutic forgiveness is, and that it is the only type of forgiveness that really works. And if forgiveness is anything less than this, we might as well stop talking about it. Forgive yourself, as well as others. Not only do we incur emotional wounds from others, most of us inflict them on ourselves. We beat ourselves over the head with self-condemnation, remorse, and regret. We beat ourselves down with self-doubt. We cut ourselves up with excessive guilt. Remorse and regret are attempts to emotionally live in the past. Excessive guilt is an attempt to make right in the past something we did wrong, or thought of as wrong in the past. Emotions are used correctly and appropriately when they help us to respond or react appropriately to a reality in the present environment. Since we cannot live in the past, we cannot appropriately react emotionally to the past. The past can be simply written off, closed, forgotten, insofar as our emotional reactions are concerned. We do not need to take an emotional position one way or the other regarding detours that might have taken us off course in the past. The important thing is our present direction and our present goal. We need to recognize our own efforts as mistakes. Otherwise, we could not correct course. Steering or guidance would be impossible. But it is futile and fatal to hate or condemn ourselves for our mistakes. A study on guilt conducted at Case Western Reserve University, reported in the September 1997 issue of Reader's Digest, found that the average person spends 2 hours a day feeling guilty. Much of this is even present moment guilt. The working mother who feels guilty while at work about not being home with her children. Then guilty, if at home in the afternoon with her children, for not pulling her weight at work. The exhausted son or daughter of an aging, infirm parent, guilty for feeling a bit irritable. The traveling executive who feels guilty about missing his daughter's recital at school. You cannot see your future with optimistic eyes if you cannot view your present and past with kind eyes. This is not to suggest simply letting yourself off the hook at every turn. Responsibility is important. But what I call the critic within is so much more powerful than other critics, we must take care not to let it run roughshod over our self-image. Once, after lecturing to a large group of inmates at an Oklahoma prison, I came away with a realization. Here I had been, in the company of robbers, murderers, people who had made horrendous mistakes, in some cases repeatedly. Yet most did not blame or punish themselves as much as many people on the outside do, for much less serious missteps in a life 99% made up of honest, ethical behavior. It is common for inmates to be jailhouse lawyers, fighting for their rights inside prison, while many good citizens deprive themselves of their basic, inalienable rights to pursue happiness solely through their own excessive self-criticism and self-punishment. As we drove away from the prison with its huge concrete walls, rolls of barbed wire on the top of the walls, and armed guards in towers, I thought to myself that many people build prisons far more intimidating than these, then lock themselves up in them, all because of some past sin. I'm not a great believer in sin, but if there is sin, it is for people who waste their lives chastising themselves for mistakes they've made, mistakes that are only human. You make mistakes. Mistakes do not make you. In thinking of our own mistakes, or those of others, It is helpful and realistic to think of them in terms of what we did or did not do, rather than in terms of what the mistakes made us. One of the biggest mistakes we can make is to confuse our behavior with ourself, to conclude that because we did a certain act, it characterizes us as a certain sort of person. It clarifies thinking if we can see that mistakes involve something we do. They refer to actions. And to be realistic, we should use verbs denoting action, rather than nouns denoting a state of being in describing them. For example, to say I failed, verb form, is but to recognize an error, and can help lead to future success. But to say I am a failure, noun form, does not describe what you did, but what you think the mistake did to you. This does not contribute to learning, but tends to fixate the mistake and make it permanent. This has been proved over and over in clinical psychological experiments. We seem to recognize that all children in learning to walk will occasionally fall. We say he fell or she stumbled. We do not say he is a faller or she is a stumbler. However, many parents fail to recognize that all children in learning to talk also make mistakes or non-fluences. Hesitation, blocking, repetition of syllables and words. It is a common experience for an anxious, concerned parent to conclude, he is a stutterer. Such an attitude or a judgment, not of the child's actions but of the child, gets across to the child, who begins to think of himself as a stutterer. His learning is fixated, and the stutter tends to become permanent. According to Dr. Wendell Johnson, the nation's foremost authority on stuttering at the time I wrote the original edition of this book, this sort of thing is the cause of stuttering. He found that the parents of non-stutterers are more likely to use descriptive terms such as, he did not speak, whereas the parents of stutterers were inclined to use judgmental terms such as, he could not speak. Writing in the Saturday Evening Post, January 5, 1957, Dr. Johnson said, slowly we begin to comprehend the vital point that had been missed for so many centuries. Case after case had developed after it had been diagnosed as stuttering by over-anxious persons unfamiliar with the facts of normal speech development. The parents, rather than the child, the listeners, rather than the speakers, seemed to be the ones most requiring understanding and instruction." Unquote. Dr. Knight Dunlap, who made a 20-year study of habits, their making, unmaking, and relation to learning, discovered that the same principle applied to virtually all bad habits, including bad emotional habits. It was essential, he said, that patients learn to stop blaming themselves, condemning themselves, and feeling remorseful over their habits, if they were to cure them. He found particularly damaging the conclusion, I am ruined, or I am worthless, because the patient had done or was doing certain acts. So remember, you make mistakes. Mistakes don't make you anything. What you do need not define who you are or what you will do. You are not your mistakes. Who wants to be an oyster? One final word about preventing and removing emotional hurts. To live creatively, we must be willing to be a little vulnerable. We must be willing to be hurt a little, if necessary, in creative living. A lot of people need a thicker and tougher emotional skin than they have, but they need only a tough emotional hide or epidermis, not a shell. To trust, to love, to open ourselves to emotional communication with other people is to run the risk of being hurt. If we are hurt once, we can do one of two things. We can build a thick protective shell or scar tissue to prevent being hurt again, live like an oyster, and not be hurt. Or we can turn the other cheek, remain vulnerable, and go on living creatively. An oyster is never hurt. It has a thick shell that protects it from everything. It is isolated. An oyster is secure, but not creative. It cannot go after what it wants. It must wait for it to come to it. An oyster knows none of the hurts of emotional communication with the environment, but neither can an oyster know the joys. An emotional facelift makes you look and feel younger. As this edition is being written, the so-called baby boomer generation is hitting the 50-year-old mark and is more obsessed with stopping the clock, even turning back the clock, than any generation before. Fortunes are spent on cosmetic surgery, liposuction, fitness gyms and devices, personal trainers, lotions and potions, growth hormone injections, on and on. I have a different prescription. Try giving yourself a spiritual facelift. It is more than a play on words. It opens you up to more life, more vitality, the stuff that youth is made of. You'll feel younger. You'll actually look younger. Many times I have seen a man or woman apparently grow 5 or 10 years younger in appearance after removing old emotional scars. Look around you. Who are the youthful-looking people you know over the age of 40? The grumpy, resentful, the pessimistic, the ones who are soured on the world? Or are they the cheerful, optimistic, good-natured people? Remember, I am a medical doctor, a plastic surgeon. I am absolutely serious and sincere when I tell you that you can look years younger in face and posture and feel years younger in health and vitality thanks to emotional surgery and self-image strengthening with psychocybernetics. Carrying a grudge against someone or against life can bring on the old age stoop, just as much as carrying a heavy weight around on your shoulders would. People with emotional scars, grudges, and the like are living in the past, which is characteristic of old people. The youthful attitude and youthful spirit that erases wrinkles from the soul and the face, and that puts a sparkle in the eye, looks to the future, and has a great expectation to look forward to. So why not give yourself a facelift? Your do-it-yourself kit consists of the relaxation of negative tensions to prevent scars, therapeutic forgiveness to remove old scars, providing yourself with a tough but not a hard epidermis instead of a shell, creative living, a willingness to be a little vulnerable, and a nostalgia for the future instead of the past. Try these mental training exercises. By far the most challenging and rewarding exercises of all suggested in this program are these, involving forgiveness. First, choose 1 or 2 persons for whom you've long carried resentment over past slights, and find a way in your heart to truly, completely forgive them, no strings attached, and ultimately do so via your actions toward them. Also, identify some past error or situation you have been carrying a grudge against yourself for, and forgive yourself. And finally, once and for all, banish this from your thoughts. This may very well require considerable work in your imagination factory. Invest 30 minutes a day for 21 consecutive days on quiet reflection, working on this with yourself, in solitude. Chapter 11. How to Unlock Your Real Personality. Elbert Hubbard wrote, "To avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing." Personality, that magnetic and mysterious something that is easy to recognize but difficult to define, is not so much acquired from without as released from within. What we call personality is the outward evidence of that unique and individual creative self, made in the image of God, that spark of divinity within us, or what might be called the free and full expression of your real self. This real self within every person is attractive. It is magnetic. It does have a powerful impact and influence on other people. We have the feeling that we are in touch with something real and basic, and it does something to us. On the other hand, a phony is universally disliked and detested. Why does everyone love babies? Certainly not for what babies can do or what they know or have, but simply because of what they are. Infants have personality plus. There is no superficiality, no phoniness, no hypocrisy. In their own language, which consists mostly of either crying or cooing, they express their real feelings. They say what they mean. There is no guile. Babies are emotionally honest. They exemplify to the nth degree the psychological dictum, be yourself. They have no qualms about expressing themselves. They are not in the least inhibited. Babies are proof that all inhibition is learned, taught to the self-image, not born within the self-image. Everyone has a dynamic personality locked up within him. Every human being has the mysterious something we call personality. When we say that people have a good personality, what we really mean is that they have freed and released the creative potential within them and are able to express their real self. Poor personality and inhibited personality are one and the same. Individuals with a poor personality do not express the creative self within. They have restrained it, handcuffed it, locked it up, and thrown away the key. The word inhibit literally means to stop, prevent, prohibit, restrain. The inhibited personality has imposed a restraint on the expression of the real self. For one reason or another, the person is afraid to express himself, afraid to be himself. and has locked up his real self within an inner prison. The symptoms of inhibition are many and varied. Shyness, timidity, self-consciousness, hostility, feelings of excessive guilt, insomnia, nervousness, irritability, inability to get along with others. Frustration is characteristic of practically every area and activity of the inhibited personality. The real and basic frustration is the failure to be himself, and the failure to adequately express himself. But this basic frustration is likely to color and overflow into all that he does. Excessive negative feedback equals inhibition. The science of cybernetics gives us a new insight into the inhibited personality and shows us the way toward disinhibition, freedom, and how to release our spirits from self-imposed prisons. Negative feedback in a servo mechanism is equivalent to criticism. Negative feedback says, in effect, "You are wrong. You're off course. You need to take corrective action to get back on the beam." The purpose of negative feedback, however, is to modify response and change the course of forward action, not to stop it altogether. If negative feedback is working properly, a missile or a torpedo reacts to criticism just enough to correct course and keeps going forward toward the target. This course will be, as we have previously explained, a series of zigzags. However, if the mechanism is too sensitive to negative feedback, the servo mechanism overcorrects. Instead of progressing toward the target, it will perform exaggerated lateral zigzags or stop all forward progress altogether. Our own built-in servo mechanism works in the same way. We must have negative feedback in order to operate purposely, in order to steer our way or be guided to a goal. Negative feedback always says, in effect, stop what you're doing or the way you're doing it and do something else. Its purpose is to modify response or change the degree of forward action, not to stop all action. Negative feedback does not say, stop, period. It says, what you are doing is wrong. But it does not say, it is wrong to do anything. Yet where negative feedback is excessive, or where our own mechanism is too sensitive to negative feedback, the result is not modification of response, but total inhibition of response. Inhibition and excessive negative feedback are one and the same. When we overreact to negative feedback or criticism, we are likely to conclude that not only is our present course slightly off beam or wrong, but that it is wrong for us even to want to go forward. A hiker or a hunter often gets back to the automobile by picking out some prominent landmark near the car, such as an extra tall tree that can be seen for miles. When returning to the car, the hiker looks for the tree or target and starts walking toward it. From time to time, the tree may be lost from his view, but the course can be checked by comparing the hiker's direction with the location of the tree. If the course is 15 degrees to the left of the tree, what the hiker is doing is wrong. He immediately corrects the course and again walks directly toward the tree. He does not, however, conclude that it is wrong for him to walk. Yet many of us are guilty of just so foolish a conclusion. When it comes to our attention that our manner of expression is off course, missing the mark, or wrong, we conclude that self-expression itself is wrong, or that success for us, reaching our target tree, is wrong. Keep in mind that excessive negative feedback has the effect of interfering with or stopping completely the appropriate response.